Oh, hello and good evening, and welcome to a virtual town hall hosted by your 3rd District legislators. Tonight, you'll be seeing and hearing from Senator Andy Billig and Representative Marcus Riccelli, and maybe Representative Timm Ormsby will join us a little bit later. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I will read some of those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your question live in the comments section of the platform you're watching on. Submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we get started with questions, however, the lawmakers will give some brief opening remarks and provide an update on the state budget proposals that were released last week. So go ahead, lawmakers.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Andy Billig, state senator from the 3rd District, which is Central Spokane, and very excited to have this opportunity for a conversation. I'll just say broadly that we came into this legislative session, with several priorities in mind. We really wanted to make sure, first and foremost, that we recover from the pandemic, both the health recovery, but also a robust economic recovery that works for everyone. And we're making progress. We've also got some other things that we're working on, some other legislative priorities, which we'll get to later on once we get to questions. Hopefully you'll have lots of questions about different things. And I just wanted to remind people, the legislature works in a 2-year cycle. So there's a long session, which is what we're in right now, which is 105 days. And during that session, we do the major budgets, the capital, transportation, and operating budgets. And we have about 25 days left in this long session. The second year of the legislative biennium is a 60-day session, which is shorter because we don't do the major 2-year budget. But that's really the hot topic right now, are the budgets, and we'll get to that in just a moment and hand it over to my seatmate, Representative Riccelli.
Well, thank you, Senator Billig. Really excited to be here tonight and looking forward to this conversation. My name is State Representative Marcus Riccelli. I also serve in the 3rd Legislative District. It's my honor to represent you. I was elected in 2012. I serve on the Healthcare, Capital Budget, Transportation, and Rules Committee, and I serve as our House Democrats Majority Whip. Andy laid out a lot of the things that we're looking at. Obviously, it's an important time to try and build back Washington and get people back to work and make sure we're doing it in a healthy and safe way. And so I always like to remind folks that these conversations are an opportunity to really engage in the civic process. And I just thank you for taking time tonight. We know a robust democracy can only exist with an active and engaged citizenry. And I look forward to the conversation and questions.
Well, that's great. We're going to now do a little overview of a couple of the budgets. And I should mention that our seatmate, Timm Ormsby, who hopefully will make it before the end, but he is the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the House, which is the very powerful committee that does the budget. So we're glad he's in that position generally, but for tonight, it means he may not be available because that committee is currently meeting. I also should have mentioned my roles in committees. I'm the Senate Majority Leader, which I'm just honored to serve in that role, and then also serve on the Rules Committee in the Senate. So let's see, can we get those slides to come up? Okay, so we want to talk about the budgets. So there's 3 budgets, the operating budget, the capital budget, which invests in infrastructure, which Representative Riccelli is going to talk about, and the transportation budget, which we can talk about during the question and answer if people want to, but that was not the focus for today. So the operating budget is the big budget. That's the main budget, $58 billion over 2 years. And it funds all of the big stuff from K-12 to higher ed to corrections, foster care, child care, all of that. I wanted to touch on a few of the highlights in the operating budget proposals that just came out this week. We completed the expansion of the Washington State University Elson S. Floyd Medical School. That's something that Representative Riccelli has really been a leader on, and all of us from the Spokane delegation have worked on to start and that medical school, and then to get the full funding, and that this completes the funding of the expansion. There's also funding for the University of Washington Medical School program in Spokane. They're moving to a new building just off the Gonzaga campus, and that comes with some increased costs, which we were able to secure funding for. Really something that I've spent a big part of my legislative career on is early learning and childcare. And we have a bill called the Fair Start Act that's going to invest over $1 billion to create better access and affordability for childcare. This is important for children. This is important for families, and so people can go to work. It's important for employers, and so something that's really dramatic and will pay dividends for us as a community and as a state. Support for businesses and workers with the unemployment insurance tax trust input. So, the unemployment insurance program was a lifesaver during the pandemic. It helped to provide a lifeline to workers who lost jobs because of this pandemic. And we've paid out, I think, over $15 billion. That's a combination of state and federal money through the UI Trust Fund. Now, the way that trust fund gets built back up is with payments from employers. So we've now depleted the fund largely, not completely, and so now we have to refill it. And so those rates then go up for businesses as that fund gets replenished. So what we've been able to do is to put in several different measures and some money to make sure that those increases are not as substantial as they would be otherwise. We have a lot of funding for affordable housing and reducing homelessness and rental assistance. And we have funding to help clean up the Spokane River from PCBs, something that we have all been working on for a long time to protect the Spokane River, which is really the lifeblood of the Spokane community. Can you go to the next slide? A few other things in the operating budget that I wanted to highlight. Education, which is a big part of the operating budget, over 50%. But we did some additions. We were able to allocate some money to help schools to safely reopen. We've increased funding for special education and more counselors for high poverty schools. For workers and families, there's an investment in a worker relief fund. And then really significant, for the first time ever, the working families tax credit is funded. And this is part of the way that we're making our, Washington has one of the most unfair tax codes or the most unfair tax code in the whole country out of all the states. But the working families tax credit will provide a rebate against sales tax for low-income families, and it really is important. Healthcare, we've got money invested in vaccination efforts to make premiums more affordable for people that are buying healthcare directly, behavioral health investments, and then a very big investment in public health is something Representative Riccelli has been a big leader on. But we've seen through this pandemic just how important public health is. Long-term and developmental disabilities investments, several very significant investments, housing, more affordable housing projects through the Housing Trust Fund, food assistance, which we've really seen during the pandemic, a need for food assistance. We've had several big investments in that. And then a really large focus on wildfire prevention and really a program to make our forests healthier so that there's less likelihood of wildfires. So there's a lot in the operating budget. We didn't want to go through everything, but those are a few of the highlights that are specific to Spokane and some of the bigger things that affect the state overall. Glad to go into more detail if people have questions. Now I'd want to hand it over to Representative Riccelli to talk about the capital budget.
Thank you, Senator Billig. And we just want to talk a little bit about, again, as Senator Billig said, we have three budgets: our operating, capital, and transportation. Our capital budget is our infrastructure budget. It's really what we consider one of our big jobs initiatives. And we make big investments, historic investments in K-12 schools and higher ed, affordable housing, emergency shelter funding, and the Housing Trust Fund. Broadband, this is something that we've been very excited to see in a bipartisan way. Folks, we realize that it's a matter of digital equity that we get for folks for education, for healthcare, and for job creation. Behavioral health funding, childcare, Senator Billig already touched upon that, and clean energy and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. One of the really exciting things that we get to work on is making sure your tax dollars are redirected right back to this community. And it's local partners coming to us, asking us for some state support of really great projects. So we wanted to highlight a few of those. You can see them on the screen, whether it be the MLK Community Center, getting a new roof there, an amazing new science building at phase one, $45 million at EWU for STEM efforts, making sure our beloved MAC is repaired and up to date. One of the things I've been working on is a place where some of our pediatric endangered children, some of our kids unfortunately born, our newborns who are born in the opioid epidemic, who are having a difficult start to life, have a place to go and get the treatment that they need. Spokane Public Radio, we're pleased to continually look for ways to fund our teen, so that they make sure that our homeless teens have a place to go. And we're working with VOA Crosswalk to make sure that's funded. And then we talked a little bit about the medical school, and we're hopeful to get funding for the WSU Spokane Biomedical and Health Sciences Building Phase 2. So that's a little bit about it. And in both of our budgets too, we really looked at racial equity and those folks who have been most hit in the pandemic as a way to center us and make investments.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you all for listening. And just a reminder to everybody out there that's watching to please feel free to ask questions through whatever platform you're joining us on tonight. Our first question, both your offices have received a lot of questions just about vaccines and the legislature's efforts. The governor today announced that on April 15th, everyone will be eligible to receive a vaccination. So could you guys just talk for a minute about what the legislature's done this year so far and to invest in vaccine distribution, public health, and the like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that question. Thanks. So, it is a big day with that announcement that everybody will have access to be vaccinated. And we know that that's a strategy to make sure that we have a healthy and safe community, that we can open up our economy again here in the near future, and we can return to life, hopefully, that was more akin to, pre-March of last year. So that's been fantastic. There's been really robust efforts. I think heavy investments in vaccinations, in strike teams and surge support for public health. But we have seen that we can do better. And I think that one of the main things that we'd like to highlight is that our operating budget is going to invest heavily in public health. That's our first line of defense. We have underfunded it, quite frankly, and maybe collectively as a society fell a little bit asleep at the wheel, understanding the importance. The COVID crisis has really shown that, and that's why we are trying to change course and make sure that we can invest in public health. I'm also pleased that a bill that your third legislative district team's been working on, and I've been leading on, House Bill 1152, to bring some balance back to our public health boards and make sure that our public health isn't infected by politics, so we can make good decisions and have healthy outcomes for all people in our communities.
Okay, great. Next, we got a question from Bridget. And Bridget would like to know just about sort of, what the legislature has been doing to make sure that landlords and tenants impacted by the pandemic are supported and have resources.
Yeah, I can start on that one. So the first thing that we've done already is to invest several $100 million in rental assistance. And this money has gone out into communities through neighborhood action organizations. In Spokane, it's SNAP that has this money to help landlords and tenants who have been impacted by the pandemic. The other thing that we're working on, there are two bills, one by Representative Macri and another by Senator Cooter, that will help address the issues of tenants being able to stay where they live, but also to do it in a way that's fair to landlords, because there's an eviction moratorium right now. That eviction moratorium will end, and probably this summer. And we need a way for that not to end with a cliff and a crisis with a bunch of people having to leave their homes. So we're working on legislation that is going to make it so that that eviction moratorium is ended in a more gentle manner, and that we can provide for tenants and for landlords to be successful and to be safe. So we're still working on that. It's one of the hot topics over the last 3 weeks of the session to get that policy just right. But in addition to the policy, we will have an additional significant investment in rental assistance. I think $400 million more, if I remember right.
Great. So we've been receiving some questions about just taxes in generally. Some people in favor of more progressive taxes, some people not. Could you all talk a little bit about just what the legislature's been doing this year to reform taxes and to reform our Washington's tax structure?
Sure, I'll take a shot at that to start. Well, one, and I think Senator Billig might add a little bit more, because the Senate has already passed over a capital gains tax to make sure that our wealthiest few are paying their fair share. I think that that's a way to put us on a path to start reversing the trend that we've had and the unfair burden that we have on most of the other population. So it really focuses on making sure that people are paying their fair share, that dollars are being invested in really important things in our economy, and I think that was a real big step forward. And some of the things we can fund because of this, if we look at our tax structure and make sure that people are paying their fair share, are things that have already been brought out, like the working families tax credit, and looking at things like how we fund childcare, which we know is a huge barrier for so many of our families today.
Yeah. And, I'll add that, when I think about us paying taxes, like, yeah, we all want to pay less. Like, I mean, that'd be nice, but we also want to make sure that we live in a place that is safe and prosperous and has things like parks and great schools and a safety net. And, in order to pay for those things, it takes taxes. And one of the things I'm really proud about, Washington State, that has actually great schools and great universities and great parks. We're a high service state, and we're a medium tax state. We're always, 25th, 26th out of the 50 states in terms of tax burden, and we're always in the top. We were just rated for the second year in a row as the best state when you look at all of the services, healthcare and everything else. The best, number one, but our taxes are right in the middle. So taxpayers are getting a good value here. And I always think about value. And I want to make sure if we add new services, we're doing things that not only help people, but pay a return on investment for the taxpayers. And that's one of the reasons I'm such an advocate for childcare and early learning. It's one of the reasons I want us to do more investment in substance abuse disorder and mental health counseling, because those things actually save us money. We keep people out of jail, which is so expensive. We set them up to be productive citizens and to pay taxes themselves. So we're thinking about that. There are a few new taxes. Capital gains is one of them, but very few new taxes in this entire $58 billion budget.
Great. Next, we have a question from Doug, and Doug would like to know what's happening to fix toward condo liability reform.
Oh, I can just take that one quickly. There's a bill, Senator Padden, actually from the neighboring 4th District, is the prime sponsor, something that I worked on as well, that we were able to pass, that helps to reduce condo liability, to encourage sort of medium market and entry market condos, which aren't being built because of some of the liability laws. That bill is in the House now, and I have not tracked it since it's been in the House, but we do have some legislation on that.
Okay, great. Earlier, we got a question about voting rights. There's been a lot of talk with the laws passed in Georgia. Now, some of the viewers were interested in what we've done here in Washington to protect voting rights, and if there are any bills like some of the ones that we've been hearing about in Georgia.
Well, I can, if that's okay with you, Representative Riccelli.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is one of my areas I've worked on a lot. There hasn't been, well, a couple of things. There actually aren't that many voting bills this year for two reasons. One, there aren't that many to advance voting rights because we're already the leading state in terms of voting access. We help to 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register. We have same-day voter registration. We have automatic voter registration. We have the Voting Rights Act. So Washington is a place where if you're eligible to vote, then it is easy to vote. And that's exactly, people say, oh, well, it's not a high bar to register 8 days in advance. It's not a high bar to have an ID. But why do we have any bar at all? Why should there be any barriers to exercising that most important right? And one very significant step forward we did take this year is we just passed out of the Senate, it was a bill that came over from the House, that creates a bright line that when people leave prison, they get their voting rights back. Right now, it's a mishmash and people get voting rights back at different times. But you leave prison, you get your voting rights back. That is a fairness issue. And it's also an equity issue because it's far more people of color that get sent to prison. So, and it's also easier to administer because it's a bright line. So it's a good government bill as well. Really significant step forward. And then some of those laws, like in Georgia, where they're trying to take away voting rights, that's not happening here.
Absolutely. I'll just add, what we've done here, and it's not a partisan issue. Our Republican Secretary of State has been on the national scene talking about how safe and secure our elections are. And quite frankly, it should, be much easier to register to vote and be able to participate than it should be to purchase a firearm. And I think, going straight to the converse is say, I'm proud of what Washington State does on voting rights and how we put our values first in front.
Great. And we'll stick with the theme of voting here for a second. Trenton asks about about House Bill 1156, which is the ranked choice voting bill. Apparently it's passed 2 committees in the House with bipartisan support. However, it didn't make it through any further than that. So I guess Representative Riccelli, could you talk a little bit about ranked choice voting and the fate of that bill?
Yeah, I'm happy to be that. And I've in the past been a co-sponsor of that bill. There's some significant questions. There were some issues that occurred in Pierce County that a number of members had some issues around, but it's one of those issues that continues to gain momentum and steam. And we had a freshman legislator who was very strong advocate and took it farther than has ever gone before. And I think there's an opportunity to build on that momentum and do work through the interim. The way our process works, so that bill is not going to move forward this session, but I think it's really creating the space for this very strong dialogue and an opportunity to make sure that we're having more people participate in the process, that they feel that their voice matters at the most. And those are the types of things that have been brought up. But there were some concerns that were brought up with some elections and how people might be gaming the system a little bit at times, or just some outcomes that maybe haven't been thought about. And I think we should be very thoughtful about how we move forward. So I'm generally supportive. I think that it's one of those longer conversations, but it's, in the how a bill becomes a law, it's advancing each year a little bit further. And this year was another step. And I know that might be frustrating to some advocates, but and folks who are strongly pushing it, but that's kind of where it landed now. And I look forward to discussions in the interim to see if there's a path forward when we come back in January.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a question from Derek. Derek would like to know about Spokane's status in phase 2 and the governor's reopening plans. So could you all talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll take that, and I saw it in the chat. It was addressed to me. So, this idea, I think the question said something about is that there's talk of the governor taking us back to phase 2. Look, the governor does not want anybody to go back to phase 2. I've talked to him directly about it. I know how invested he is in trying to get us back to normal. There is a system in place. There are metrics in place. And what we need to do to make sure we don't go back to phase 2 is to keep wearing masks, to keep distance, to keep respecting all of the public health measures that are in place. If we go over the case limit or the hospitalization limit, we will go back. That's what's going to happen. And it's by county. So we're in control. The people of Spokane are in control. And the good news is we've done an amazing job. And so right now we're not going back. I hope we don't go back. And as long as everybody keeps doing what they're doing, we're not going to go back. So please keep wearing your mask. Please keep 6 feet apart. Keep washing your hands. Keep to the percentage restrictions that are well known. And you're keeping your neighbors, your family, your friends safe, and you're also keeping our economy open.
Great. Sounds like a good time to ask about kind of small businesses. Small businesses we've heard have done, had such a hard time during the pandemic. Could you both talk a little bit about the legislature's efforts to support small businesses this year and beyond?
Sure. I'll lead off, and I know Senator Billig can take it from where I leave off from there. we came in and passed some early action items that were really focused on recovery. I think combined with the federal government actions, we know that our small businesses are an economic engine for our economy, and they've been hit extremely hard. When I came back from the legislative session, I saw just historic need for folks when it came to food security, but I also saw a restaurant industry being hit hard. So I worked on a thing called Spokane Food Fighters to try and combine those needs. But we've seen, across the board, just how difficult it's been, and that we need to make investments, whether that be things that we did to help with protective equipment so that they can conduct their business safely, whether it be relief, just straight up economic relief. And then I think Senator Billig touched upon it, and I'll pass it to him to talk about with the funding of the unemployment insurance, et cetera, and how we are really helping step up to make sure that they're not incurring costs that are, quite frankly, could be deemed insurmountable in times when some of them are businesses that we need to employ people and to do well are on the brink.
Great, thank you for that. And I saw a follow-up from Derek for my last question, and he mentioned about vaccines. And sorry, I left that out. That's absolutely right. Just the more we get vaccines, the better off we're going to be in terms of opening up. And that's a great addition, Derek. Thanks for that. The good news is the vaccines are going really well. It seems to be working, and also with the announcement that more people can get vaccinated on April 15th is really a big step forward. So that is a huge part to reopening. I absolutely agree, and that should keep the numbers low. And if the numbers are low, then everybody's happy. We keep reopening more. I'm a business owner. My business has been closed for 21 months before we have a chance of opening in May. And I sure hope these numbers stay low. The reason the metrics are there, though, I also should have added, is because if the hospitalizations go up, that means people are getting sick. That means you only go to the hospital if you're really sick. And we know when hospitalization goes up, the deaths go up. But because vaccinations, especially in the elderly, most vulnerable, have been a really high percentage of people getting them, that's why we're in better shape now than we were. Just touching briefly on the small business answer, the things we've done, the unemployment insurance is really big. Not only what we've done already with a policy bill that helps for the 2021 unemployment insurance rates, but also the money that we're going to put in to help companies that have been most hit, hardest hit, and having the biggest rate increases to address and minimize their increases. We'll also have things like liquor license fees suspended for an entire year, because we know that businesses that have liquor license, restaurants and bars, were particularly hit. Childcare is absolutely a business issue. We've had all the business groups lobbying for these big childcare investments, because they know that they need that for their employees to work successfully. And then we've got a few other small business issues that we're working on that we still also might be able to pass. But I'd say a really hard year for small businesses in 2020, but actually a good legislative year with legislation and investments related to small business.
Great. I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, to please put it in the chat through whichever platform you're watching. Next, we have a question from Doug, and Doug would like to know what is being done to help first-time home buyers.
You want to take that, Marcus? You want me?
Go for it. Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're doing, we have to look at just creating more affordable housing. I think that's the number one thing we're doing right now. We're looking at how, particularly in Spokane, even during the pandemic, we're seeing people being priced out at every level. So what can we do to facilitate affordable housing throughout our community and make sure that people aren't priced out who are working families with, and just aren't able to do it. And then I think a big piece is access to loans, et cetera. And I think we're doing a lot, particularly with some of our underrepresented communities, to inject opportunities for them to get access to capital and make sure that they can get secured loans. So I'll pass it to Senator Billig, see if he has some things to add to that.
Well, I'll just mention something that we did last year. we did a restructuring of the real estate excise tax. So this is the tax that's paid when you have a real estate transaction. And it used to just be a set amount, a set percentage. And what we did is we staggered it. So you actually pay a lower amount if you have a less expensive house. You pay a lower percentage. And so that was something really to help people, and have really helped people, particularly in areas like Spokane, to try to get into that first house.
And I'm going to just, because I think this is a good place to show how Andy and I are following along. So the comments that we're getting are popping up fast, but there's a number of folks clamoring to have one of Linda Tackner's questions answered. And I think that's fine. We're trying to get to them as soon as possible, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. So I have one here that says, we should return to in-person voting. It supports a sense of community and our actual participation in our government. Why do you want to isolate us from the process? Look, I don't think anybody wants to isolate anybody from the process. I think that voting by mail has been shown to be extremely successful. It's increased the amount of participation. It's safe and secure. And it gives people that time that you don't have in the voting booth to spend time researching. I know a number of people that call me. We publish our phone numbers in that. They're going through their ballot when we're knocking on the doors in non-COVID times and we're being safe. People want to have that conversation right there. That still occurs because they have their ballot that's sitting on their table. So I actually think sometimes we're going to disagree on some things. I think that our process here in Washington State is not isolating. It's actually much more inclusive. And I'm really proud at how often it is. If you still want to vote in person, you can look at things like happened in our arena, even during COVID times, where people were able to go down there and drop their ballots off.
Yeah, and I'll answer Linda's other question, but just on that one, the other thing about mail-in voting that's so good is it creates a paper trail. So, one of the things that we saw in some of the other states with electronic voting, where you go in person and it's electronic, there was questions at times. Nothing was ever proven. There was no voter fraud anywhere proven of any significance. But it's one of the strengths of mail-in voting is that you have a paper trail because it's all paper, not electronic. And you can always go back then and audit it. Her other question was about making the voting process, trying to keep the voting process from being public. And I think she's referring to a specific bill. There is some confusion around this bill. So there's a bill that says that the security codes, the coding related to some of the software that helps to tabulate the electronics is not public. And the reason we need that is that would be susceptible to hackers who want to come and do harm to our voting system. So it's a voting security issue to not have that be publicly available. But everything about the voting process, all of the vote totals, all of the audits of the votes, that is all public. And the bill that I think is being referenced has nothing to do with that.
Okay, next we have a question from Will, who is asking about if there's any conversation around a year-round school.
Sure. Yeah. So we've looked at changing the school calendar and adding school days. I actually passed a bill 5 or 6 years ago to do a pilot project, but it's very expensive. So we actually couldn't secure the funding for it. We were going to have 10 schools add 20 days to their school year. And then measure that against other schools and see how the progress is. And kids would certainly make better progress, but to see if it would be worth the investment. So, that was, 5 years. There's more talk now. I think actually the House budget actually may have funded a few extra days of school, or at least an option for school districts to do that. But the school calendar is based on an old farming, mentality, which we still have great agricultural communities, but I don't think that the schools necessarily need to reflect that because, it was really because the students had to work on the farms. That's just not a good reason to have a school calendar now that clearly isn't working, especially for low-income students. I will never forget when my daughter was in second grade and we went in the spring to meet with the parent-teacher conference, and the teacher said, this is where your daughter is, Bella. This is where Bella is right now in reading. This is where she'll be at the end of the school year. It was a higher number. And then they said, and this is where she'll be in September. And it was a lower number. And I was so confused. And I thought, well, maybe it's like golf. and the goal is to get the lower number. And I asked, and she said, no. Kids over the summer actually lose their reading level. And it's especially dramatic for lower income kids who maybe aren't getting all of that enrichment that other kids may be getting in the summer. So we are looking at it. We're hoping to make the districts can do that already. But it's two things: one, adding days, and adjusting the calendar. And we're working on both, but it's slow progress.
Great. Next, we have a question from Dave. Dave has a question about the transportation revenue package that was introduced. He's concerned about the increase in gas tax and says that Spokane families are finding more affordable housing options in surrounding rural communities, which are often more than an hour's drive from their jobs and social support networks are located. How can we balance transportation projects with the need and the access for affordable rent and mortgage?
I think that's a great question, and I'm serving on transportation committee, and I actually do support a transportation revenue package. I think there's still a lot to be discussed, and whether or not we get to one by the session, I'm hopeful. But what I do think we need is investments in our multimodal, things like division bus rapid transit that can make it more accessible for more people to travel quicker to city centers, to make sure that people of different means are able to get around as needed to things like healthcare appointments and jobs, etc. I think that the gas tax is regressive and it's a poor way to do it, but it's the best that we have right now. I think, we need these investments in multimodal. We want to do some things to make sure that we're working on climate change and environmental justice. I also think that, we should move to a road user charge at some point. And I think that we can get there. But before we get there, we have about a $7 billion gap in preservation and maintenance of our existing funds. We need to finish what we started for our Connecting Washington package that we passed and make sure that we have funds for that. And we've seen, revenues in transportation are down because people haven't been driving as much and we depend on that gas tax. So I think you bring up, it's a real complex issue. I'm very supportive of preservation and maintenance, but also significant investments in multimodal. So that means, transit. Our Central City line is moving forward, division bus rapid transit, to make sure that we're looking at new exciting things like green belts to connect people for bikeways, and making sure we're funding things like safe routes to schools. So I think, I do think that a little more pain at the pump is something worth considering if the investments match and if we're connecting that with environmental justice.
Great. Somewhat related, we have a question about the low carbon fuel standard and whether or not that will pass this year.
Sure. The low carbon fuel standards bill that helps to reduce the intensity of carbon in fuel, so that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But it also has the effect of being a job creator too, because it'll create investments in biofuels. One of the areas I've worked on is aviation biofuels, and Washington's really well set up to be a leader in aviation biofuels and biofuels generally, because we have the feedstocks, which are agricultural usually, or forest waste. We have the technology. Washington State University is actually in a partnership with MIT and is one of the leaders in aviation biofuels and biofuels research and development. And then we have Boeing and we have Alaska Airlines. We also have the military, who's very interested in biofuels, with 2 Air Force bases in Washington State. So we're in like the perfect position to do it. And one of the things I'm excited about low carbon fuel standards certainly is going to be good for our planet, and it's going to show leadership that we're, to other states. So hopefully creates even more momentum. But I'm excited about the economic development aspects of the low carbon fuel standard. And is it going to pass? It's close. So we are working on it. It's moving. I think I think it has a fairly decent chance. But these last 25 days of session is when a lot of the big bills get their final tweaks, and then they get their votes, and then we see what happens. So I certainly support it, and I'm hoping that it passes.
Okay, great. Next, we have a question from Joan, who has a question about people that are experiencing homelessness in Spokane. Joan says, currently in Spokane, there's no legal place for homeless people to exist in public. There is no real-time or accurate shelter bed availability for the public. Can we capture some funds for a day center for people?
I'll take that. Over 2 years ago, I asked former mayor what we could do, and I've asked the council, and I think that there's absolutely opportunity for capital funds for a day shelter. I would go to bat for that. I am looking for potentially maybe a nonprofit that wants to step up. At this point, I have to say that it's been a lackluster decision-making process, and I think it's something that's sorely needed, where people can connect with services, where people can get healthcare access. Maybe they can get a shower and have a locker to put their stuff, and we can try and put people on a better path who are willing to engage and have access to those services. And I think it's just the humane thing to do. And I think we failed again when it came to not just a day services, but warming consistently, making sure people have access to warming centers in our most cold times.
And, and I'll just jump in. There's a question in the chat that I wanted to make sure that we capture before it goes out of the view on the screen about schools and school reopening. And it's specific asking about our kids being out of school. Well, I'm really glad Spokane Public Schools, I think, played it perfect. And so, they started having kids back in October. They did it slowly and safely, and have most kids back now, if the families want the kids to be back. And they did it in a real, there's been a little bit of COVID transmission, but they've shown that you can do it safely. So hats off to Spokane Public Schools and all of the hardworking educators who stepped up, and to the kids who are making sacrifices. Look, it's been hard when kids are out of school. We know they don't learn well enough. And I've definitely been a proponent of getting back as fastly as we safely can get back. And Spokane, not just the Spokane district, but the other districts around Spokane have really been leaders on that. And I'm also going to do a shout out to Governor Inslee, because he has been pushing for districts to open and provide, and the legislature has provided resources to help districts. So I think it's been handled safely and effectively, and it's unfortunate that kids had to be out of school at all. But I think it was the right thing early, and I think it's the right thing that they're coming back now. And I really appreciate everybody making it work.
Great point, Senator. I would just add that, that's where we see access to food, where we see access to behavioral health services. And it's really important. I don't think we'll know the full impacts on youth mental health for months to come without that social interaction and without, being in the classroom. So I think that's something that we need to work on. That's why I support getting more school-based health centers, making sure that we have nurses and behavioral health counselors in our schools. And then again, food is health. That's something that I've said, and making sure that we have access to healthy foods in schools, and that we're not putting up barriers for people like lunch copays, which is something that we've passed out of the House.
And we'll stick with the school topic here. We've got a question from Sean, who'd like to know what you all are doing to support students to help get a jump start when they return to school next year. What investments is the legislature making?
So thanks, Sean. Appreciate the question. One of the things that's sort of special about our school system in Washington State is that it's decentralized. It's local control. So we have 295 school districts. So generally, the state provides the money, not all the money, but most of the money. And then the districts, through their elected leaders, get to decide how to spend that money. Now, some of the money comes with strings attached and specific district programs. But that's generally how it works. And that's really, I think, how it should work now, because each district knows their community and their kids and what they need. So what we're going to do in this budget is make sure the district have the money they need to be able to invest to help with the recovery of learning loss, to be able to help support the students how they need to be supported. And the initial, we're still going through the final tweaks of the budget, but the initial estimate will show a very significant additional investment in resources for pandemic recovery for the school districts to be able to invest in their students. So we'll leave it up to the districts. I think my personal opinion is adding some days, I think will be helpful. And I think also being able to provide those extra resources for the kids that are struggling. Look, we know in remote school, there are some kids were thriving with that, but many were not. And so the districts can take that money and invest it in the kids and the programs and the schools where they see the most need.
And the budgets that we'll see going forward, this is a time when we work out, where we're headed. And I think that both budgets will support extra days in schools. The House budget I'm just more familiar with, and does do 5 days, $278 million, and then puts over $50 million for counselors into lower income, high poverty schools too. I think those are two big ways. And then one way we can really help get a jump start is something that Senator Billig's been a champion on, is that's making sure that we're doing the investments we're doing on early learning, because that's the best way those students who may not even have been in school are going to get ahead and stay ahead.
Okay, great. Next, we will go to a question.
Aaron, can I just say this is awesome? I love the questions. This is great, rapid fire, engaged constituents getting to quiz and push their legislators. So I just love it. Keep the questions coming.
Great. Well, Sue's got a hot one for you here then.
That's the one I was looking at.
So Sue would like to know about ESD and what's being done to recover some of the money that was lost in some of the fraud early on during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I think we're doing a look back, but one of the big things is I think that we did a poor job at getting money out to people in as timely fashion as it should have been. I think that there was cause for concern, and we saw what could happen when we were exposed. One of the big things is that, we need to make more investments in our IT infrastructure. That's clear. That's not just for businesses, that's for government. And we continue to try and just skate by. And I mean, just a few years ago, we saw what happened when the community college systems were not upgraded with technology, and we tried to jump them up. I mean, these are significant investments we need to make on security. I think there's a lot of efforts going to recover that money, but I think the big piece for me going forward is to make sure that we're not vulnerable like this again. But I do want to connect it with that and say that, our legislative aides who we work with have spent tons and tons of time with constituents trying to unlock those dollars. And that to me was too slow and took too long for a number of people. And we need to do a much better job. And I think that that's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to push on going forward.
Yeah. And, look, the ESD, there were a lot of problems, and our constituents who were already hurting because of the pandemic had to pay the price for that. And it's inexcusable. And we put pressure on ESD to try to do better. And in a lot of ways, they have gotten better. So I appreciate that, but it was too slow and it wasn't good enough. In terms of the fraud, there was this tension. They wanted to get the money out quickly to people at the beginning of the pandemic. And so what it sounds like happened is, in order to move quick, I mean, part of the reason things go slowly is because they need to check and double check and then call your former employer. Did you leave the job? What reason did you leave? And those things take time. And so what it sounds like happened, they cut the corners a little bit, and also the software was not adequate enough in an effort to get the money out faster. So then the fraud happens, they lock it down, double and triple check everything, and then that slows it down, and that was also a problem. The good news is a bunch of the money was recovered, and then we also made sure in the Senate budget, and I think in the House budget as well, that there was funds paid back into the unemployment trust fund. So the businesses that actually pay into the taxes to pay into the unemployment trust account don't have to pay back. I think it was about $83 million in state dollars that were lost to fraud. Employers are not paying for that. We wanted to make sure of that, but it shouldn't have happened. And we are keeping the ESD accountable and helping them just to get better with their customer service, so that people that are struggling and have lost their job get those payments and benefits right away.
The Senate also passed a great bill, Sue, 5193, to hire more adjudicators, have more oversight, put things in more plain, accessible language. Next, we will go to Clay, who has a question about the capital budget. Clay asks, in the Senate capital budget, there's funds to design the apprenticeship center at Spokane Community College, but the House budget does not have those funds. Will the final budget get closer to the Senate budget?
Yeah, I'll take that question. I serve on the capital budget and have since I started. I work closely with our chair and am heavily engaged in that process. You know, we actually have I talked directly with the chair, and there was a recognition, a bit of oversight with our community college funding, and I think we are looking very much to course correcting that and making sure that we align with the Senate budget more. And I think you'll see differences throughout the capital budgets and operating budgets, and that's what this process is for. So I appreciate the question. You know, we do a lot of great things across the board, but you know, that's why we have this process. And I don't think that the House budget, capital budget got it right on this one. And I think we're going to work that out in what we call conference.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on I meant to say this earlier when we were talking about the budgets, about what the next steps are in the budget. So the House and Senate have both put out budgets. They both passed out of committee in their respective chambers. The Senate budget's going to come to the Senate floor tomorrow for a vote. I think the House budget is maybe Saturday. The
House operating budget will go off Saturday, and our transportation and capital will be Friday.
Great. And then what happens after the House and Senate each pass their budgets, and there's a lot of similarities, but they're not exactly the same. Then there's basically negotiations to reconcile the two budgets. And that's really one of the main things that happens in the final weeks of the session. And then we'll come back in those last few days of the session and pass a final transportation budget that's the same for both chambers, a final capital budget that's the same, and a final reconciled operating budget.
I wanted to throw in there as well, because we're kind of rounding in. I just wanted to make sure folks are tracking some of the things that we're working on. We've talked a lot about healthcare. One of the bills that's in the Senate that I introduced, House Bill 1196, provides access to audio-only telehealth. And I think that is something that's important, particularly when it comes to behavioral health in the pandemic and outside the pandemic, and also recognizing that a lot of people, until we get light up all of Washington State with broadband, that's an important tool. So I just wanted to use this moment to plug some of the things that we're working on, and hope that you'll check out our websites. And I also want to say again, because it's been since the top of the hour and some of you may have joined us, that we are not joined by Representative Timm Ormsby tonight, who is one of our teammates, but he is the chair of the Appropriations Committee and serving in that capacity tonight, so not able to join us. And we want him there. We want him as the chair of the budget for the House side.
Okay, great. Next, we have a question about early learning and childcare. If you both could talk for just a second about what's being done to address that issue. You talked about it at the top. What's in the Senate and House budgets to address early learning and childcare?
Yeah, well, it's great. Thanks for the question. Actually, I think the House and Senate budgets are quite similar and, really terrific in this area. There's a bill called the Fair Start Act that is really focused on affordability and access for childcare for families in Washington State. And it's really, what happens is there's this state program to assist people with childcare because it's so expensive. It's more expensive than college. In college, at least you have 18 years to save potentially. But childcare is right then, and it's not as structured a system as it should be. So what we wanted to do is to say for low-income families and getting up into middle-income families to say, we're going to get this program of assistance out to more families. But what happens is a lot of families say, yes, I qualified for a subsidy, for support for childcare. My kid's going to finally get high-quality childcare. And then they call around and every spot is filled because there aren't enough providers and the providers don't want to take the slots because the reimbursement rates aren't high enough. So what we did in this budget is we said, we're going to pay providers more so they have incentive to create more spots, and we're going to increase the eligibility so more families, more kids have access to this. And the reason that's so important is so parents can go to work, kids have a safe place to go. But more than that, we know that if early learning and childcare is high quality, that it changes the trajectory of their life. And the kids that get high quality early learning are less likely to be in prison. They have better health outcomes. The greater chance that they're going to graduate from high school, go to college, and persist in college. It's a win for them. It's a win for their families. It's a win for employers, and it's a win for taxpayers because it pays a return on investment.
And I'll just do a slight overview to add. So the House again, similar to Senate investment, but the House puts in $790 million for early learning and childcare. And that's money to provide stabilization for grants to eligible childcare providers and expand slots and increase rates. And it does a number of things. So, I mean, that is a significant investment. And I think that's one where we heard from the community, we heard from businesses, and it's something that we had a broad commitment, and it's a value that Washington State showed that they wanted in their budget.
Okay, we've got time for just a couple more. Linda would like to know how, if there's funding for housing and homelessness projects in the recently passed American Rescue Plan.
Yeah, so there's money in a couple different ways. So there's money that goes out to the city and counties, which they can use in a variety of ways. But I know housing and homelessness is a priority for cities and counties. And so I would expect some of that money to be spent. And then the House and Senate budget also use some of that money to invest in rental assistance and other housing programs. The underlying budgets also make huge investments of state money. The other thing about this federal money is it's come in fairly late. So we still have some of the federal money that's not allocated. And I think one of the prudent things for us to do is to save some of that money. We have until 2024, the end of 2024, to spend it. So we want to save some of that money for the next legislative session, because we don't even know right now what all the impacts of COVID are going to be. So we may be able to invest some of that money smarter if we keep a little bit of it there. But we also, in the next 3 weeks, will be making additional decisions. One of the things that happens when the federal government passes these big packages, they send the money out and they send it out with rules. But the rules at the beginning are very general, and they say, within the next 60 days, we'll give you the detail on the rules. And we're still waiting for that detail. And once we have that, we'll be able to make some additional investments. Housing, preventing homelessness, absolutely high on the list of priorities.
Okay, great. We have a question from Jim. Jim has a question about the Blake decision. Now, with the Supreme Court overturning the state's drug possession law, it's an opportunity to treat addiction as a disease instead of a crime. Will the legislature address this court decision?
I hope so. I think this is an opportunity. Look, we need to do something. Basically, the court threw out the entire drug possession law. And I think the way Jim phrased that question is exactly right. We can do this in a way that's smarter, that actually increases public safety and helps people by treating the underlying cause of the possession, which is typically addiction. And so if we have something that really focuses on treating that underlying cause, I just know we're going to be better. We're going to save money, we're going to improve lives, and we're going to make our community safer. So that's what we're working on. If I were to line up the challenges we have in the remaining weeks, that's near the top of the list. Because we usually, a major policy like this, we'll work all interim. We'll work for months with stakeholders and focus groups and legislators and try to get the policy exactly right. This got thrown in our laps in the middle of the legislative session. So it's a bit of a rush, and it's why it's taking till the end of the session to get it right. But it's really important, and I'm optimistic that we'll have a really responsible solution.
And I'll just add, as somebody who works a lot on healthcare, absolutely, we need to work and treat addiction. My number one capital budget request wouldn't be for Maddie's house to treat drug endangered children if we have a problem, and that's just something that we need to we need everybody on board, and we need the dollars, and we need the treatment, and also something that we're working on, we need the behavioral health workforce.
Great. Okay, and our last question, Representative Riccelli, is about ditch the switch. So if you could give us an update on daylight savings time and that issue.
Sure. Hey, it's an annoying, archaic practice. We want it lighter, longer. Washington State voted on a bill that I prime sponsored to hashtag ditch the switch. We've merged with hashtag lock the clock. But in all seriousness, Senator Patty Murray and Marco Rubio did an op-ed talking about how they're on different sides of the state and different sides of the political spectrum, but they agree Americans want to put this to bed. I think we have a unique opportunity that U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell now chairs the committee where that bill can be heard. I've been asking their office to hear it, and I think it's time. In all seriousness, we see increases in crime, cardiac arrest, strokes, car collisions when we change our clocks. And if you're a parent of younger children, you know that it causes chaos in time schedules too. So I think we are moving towards hashtag ditch the switch.
All right, fantastic. That's the end. So thank you everyone who participated in our virtual town hall tonight. I'm going to turn it back over to the members. Senator Billig, would you like to go first, say some closing remarks?
Yeah, well, just thank you so much. This is really feels important work and important to us doing our jobs. We work for you and we do our job best when we hear from you. So hearing what kinds of things you're asking about, hearing your comments is crucial. And we don't want to just hear about it when we do our couple town hall meetings. We want to hear about it all the time. So there's the email address up on the screen. We're easy to find on the internet. I read every email that comes in from a constituent and we respond to everyone as well. So if you've got ideas, comments, questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Sometimes people say, oh, I don't want to bother you. It's not a bother. It's our job. And we like it. So please stay in touch. I want to say thanks to my seatmate, Marcus Riccelli, and also Timm Ormsby. We've got a really great team. We have our different areas that we specialize in, so we complement each other and we work together as a team on behalf of all of you, our constituents. It's a great honor to serve this community. Thanks for giving me that honor, and thanks for being here tonight.
Well, and thanks, Senator Billig. I want to echo, I think we have a great team, and I appreciate serving with Senator Billig and Representative Ormsby. But I'll get back to where I started. A robust democracy can only exist with an active and engaged citizenry. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for doing your part. Thank you for holding us accountable and asking tough questions. What I'd also ask is that you go on to our websites. I'd like you to sign up for my e-newsletter. You can follow my official page on Facebook. We try and put out a lot of good information. And then I hope you'll just interact with us. A lot of the best ideas that I've had doing this job are coming from constituents and people that I have conversations with. So thank you for that. And I look forward to continued discussion and engagement so we can move Spokane forward.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And that's another reminder. Please email, please call if we didn't get to your question tonight. And thank you so much for joining us.